Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mr. Bilal Muhammad, and I'm a Muslim teacher and educator from Toronto. I'm a senior fellow at the Berkeley Institute for Islamic Studies, and I work for an organization focused on integrating Islam into everyday school subjects called Active Aql. I wanted to do a series of interviews with original thinkers whose work I believe I must expose my audience to. So today, I'm joined by Mr. Daniel Haqiqatjou. He studied physics as an undergraduate at Harvard, mashallah, University, and completed graduate studies in philosophy, studying with some of the top physicists and philosophers in the world, including Nobel Prize winners. He also studied Islam traditionally with respected ulama. He has written and lectured on contemporary issues surrounding Muslims and modernity over the past 10 years and has spoken at universities and mosques around the world. He lives with his wife and 4 children, mashallah, in the United States. So, assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank
So
you for having me on.
Thank you. People have asked me if I was your brother, because apparently we look kind of alike.
Oh yeah.
However, your beard is more advanced than mine.
Well, inshallah, everyone can advance in that regard.
I mean, and advance in taqwa as well. So we'll get right into it. So first off, did you hesitate at all when writing your piece on Dalia Mogahed, considering some of the other work that she's done for ISPU?
Sure. So just as a background, I wrote recently an article on MuslimGirl.com, which is a website that has been publishing for quite some time articles that are very problematic and anti-Islamic. Articles justifying zina, normalizing illegal sexual behavior, LGBT, removing the hijab. Very problematic type of material that they're constantly publishing. And so this is an article or a media outlet that no respectable Muslim, especially no Muslim leader or community leader, should be involved with and promoting and endorsing and appearing on. So this is something that I want to highlight, and I highlighted some individuals who have a close connection with MuslimGirl.com and have been endorsing them and promoting them. And the main person that I highlighted was Dalia Mogahed. She's not the only one, but she was the one that I felt would be good to ask some questions of, and basically ask her, why do you think it's justified for you as a community leader to endorse MuslimGirl.com and say that they're a very valued contribution to the Muslim discourse, and basically appearing on their outlet and praising them, endorsing them. So this is bad. This is very dangerous when you have a mainstream Muslim figure, hijabi, wearing hijab, who is appearing on the different kinds of boards, advisory boards of mainstream Muslim organizations and institutes, and is seen as a community leader by many young Muslims. And then she is endorsing this very problematic, very anti-Islamic media outlet, MuslimGirl.com. So I want to just ask questions. Why do you feel that this is justified? How do you explain it? And I also tied into those questions the work that she does with the ISPU, Institute of Social Policy and Understanding. And she used to be one of the advisors to the Obama administration back when Obama was president. And so she has this very visible role at this kind of think tank that produces different kinds of research and material focused on American Muslims. And so some of the things that organization promotes and produces is also problematic, endorsing a kind of LGBT rights agenda, saying that Muslims need to be involved with that LGBT rights agenda, things that are very problematic. And the majority of Muslims in the West would not accept and would not consider to be something that their leaders should be engaged in and promoting and endorsing. So I just wanted to highlight all of that and ask some pointed questions. I think that there are questions that deserve responses from our leaders and specifically Sister Dalia.
Okay, so you did mention that she is seen as a type of role model, especially for young Muslim women, especially in the diaspora. Other names come up on that list, Linda Sarsour, and the MuslimGirl crowd. They've all become kind of role models, namely because they present like an unabashed Muslim identity, as well as their progressive views, which jive with the popular culture. So how should we present traditional role models for Muslim women and build alternative networks for female Orthodox voices?
I think that we have to, first of all, ask, well, why aren't these figures proper role models? I think that's a question that first has to be addressed, because some people are not aware of really why. And when I say they're not role models, it's not because I have some kind of vendetta against them, or I think that they, in terms of their heart or what they actually believe or what they're trying to do, I think, Allahu Alam, based on husn dhan, I think they have good intentions. But the problem is that intentions are not enough. It's not enough to have good intentions if you're doing things and associating with groups and aligning with certain political agendas that directly threaten the iman of the Muslim community and Muslim youth that are looking up to you. And so, unfortunately, the way that some parts of the Muslim community behave is that if someone is featured on any kind of mainstream outlet, such as CNN, for example, or the New York Times, or whatever, Washington Post, and they're given media coverage and they're kind of accepted within that media establishment for example, speaking out on Islamophobia and saying basic things like, oh, Muslims shouldn't be surveilled, they shouldn't be discriminated against, then those individuals somehow are quickly accepted into the community as role models and put on this pedestal where they're literally, taken on tour throughout masajid and conferences and conventions, all because they said something like, Muslims shouldn't be discriminated against. So the bar is very low for who is being accepted as a community role model and figure. And this becomes a problem, because what happens is that the mainstream media and the U.S. political establishment gets to decide who are our leaders in our community, rather than be our standards for deciding, okay, is this person a leader because he or she is living up to the standards of the Quran and the Sunnah, because he or she is living by the values and the principles of Islam. We decide who are our leaders based on those objective, God-centered, Allah-centered standards. Not the mainstream media decides to put a camera in someone's face and that person says, oh yeah, Muslims should be treated better. That's a very low bar. Someone like Reza Aslan. Reza Aslan is an academic. He is featured sometimes on the mainstream news saying, very generic, basic things, defending Muslim rights, seemingly defending Muslim rights. And then people look up to him and say, oh, look at this, mashallah, Muslim leader. When in fact, Reza Aslan, if you look at his views and the kinds of things that he does, they're extremely contrary to Islam. And sometimes some of the statements that he's made are clear kufr. They're clear kufr. So how can this be a leader or a role model for the Muslim community? It just boggles the mind. So as far as building our own role models, defining our own role models, we have to first understand, well, what makes a role model? And in that case, it's someone who is abiding by the Quran and the Sunnah, someone who is abiding by and has the respect of the tradition and the traditional ulama and the elders within our community. That's someone that we should consider to be a role model, and we should try to emulate, and we should celebrate, whether male or female. And unfortunately, the culture is not, increasingly not suited for that. When you have a social media culture and things like Instagram likes or YouTube subscribers, whatever is drawing the most attention, whatever is being featured in the mainstream news, these are the people who are suddenly put on pedestals. And I think that the traditional Muslim community, the masajid and the national organizations, they shouldn't contribute to that. They shouldn't contribute to promoting people who are clearly, directly, publicly going against Islam and Islamic values. Just because they have a large following online doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's possible for someone to have a large following online and also abide by Islamic values, and okay, that's fine. But then if we are sacrificing Islamic values and principles for simply popularity and mainstream acceptance or a position within the American or Western political establishment, then that's a big problem. And those kinds of sacrifices directly will lead to and have led to the loss of faith, loss of iman within the Muslim community. So this is a Faustian bargain that we cannot afford to make. We cannot afford to make as a community.
So with your permission, just to follow up very quickly on that, whether you have Reza Aslan eating human flesh on live television,
right,
or whether you have certain people promoting alternative lifestyles, we'll say, do you believe that these people are beyond reproach, or that we should advise them and rectify them, and that so basically, have they bought into the system completely, have been brainwashed, and are beyond reproach? Or do you think that we're in a position where we can advise them? Because if they're beyond reproach, then you'd have to introduce new figures. While if you believe that they'll be open-minded enough to take advice from yourself or myself or others, that they could be reformed.
Well, I don't think that anyone is beyond reproach, even Reza Aslan. Everyone has the opportunity to change and to make tawbah and to right wrongs. And that's what I pray for. That's what I want. I want people, Muslim brothers and sisters, to rectify their ways. And that's what I would want others to hope for me. If I ever make mistakes or say things that are wrong, then we should advise, right? We should give nasiha. But there are different ways to give nasiha. One of the things that boggles my mind and is really shocking to me is that some of these figures are constantly in the presence of teachers, scholars, du'at, who should know, right and wrong and should be able to advise them and are closer to those figures. I'll just mention Linda Sarsour, not to pick on her, but she is very visible. She is often headlining at these Islamic conventions, despite the fact that she is promoting things like LGBT. Recently, she spoke out against the implementation of Sharia in Brunei. In the past, she has expressed support for Tunisia, basically doing away with inheritance laws based on the Sharia and creating kind of equality in inheritance between men and women, contrary to the dictates of the Quran and the dictates of the Sharia, and she has supported that. So things are clearly problematic. Praising, for example, praising the religious rituals of other religions, videotaping herself, in a church service and saying, wow, this church service is so powerful. So things that are very clearly Islamically wrong, and it doesn't require a sheikh, an alim, to recognize that. But she has those kinds of contexts, and just by sheer virtue of being on the same panels as them, being in the same discussions as them, in the same venues as them. So it's not my responsibility or your responsibility necessarily to advise her as if that's that's only on us. Why aren't the people who are around her, surrounding her, why aren't they advising her? Maybe they have advised her and she's ignored it, so that's really bad. Or they haven't advised her, which is, I think, arguably worse. So this is something where if that kind of counsel is not happening privately, then I think there is a need to put pressure publicly because the things that they're doing is very public, right? As public figures, when 50 weeks out of the year you're at a conference or a convention at a masjid speaking to Muslims, then the public, the kind of criticism that you should get should also be public, and people should be made aware of these kinds of issues and the kinds of statements that you've made. You should get that kind of criticism. And I have found, because I have given private counsel to people, people at that level, and oftentimes it doesn't work. Like, you don't get the response and you don't see a change. I've seen people get advised by people who are very knowledgeable and nothing changes. So at that point, I think public criticism is justified, is valid, and can actually have a positive effect, because that person is going to realize that, okay, I don't have a carte blanche to say and do and associate whatever I feel like, right? I'm going to get that scrutiny. I'm going to get that backlash. I'm going to get that heat for that, and that's a good thing. They should feel that. They should feel that hesitation next time they want to tweet something or stand on a panel with someone or whatever.
Thank you for your answer. And obviously, you are someone that is, not afraid of calling things out as you see them publicly. Alhamdulillah. And so, unfortunately, we have been missing a lot of those kinds of voices in the community. And like you said, the kind of silence of certain people, community leaders, has been kind of deafening, unfortunately.
Well, I think, just to add a point to that, I don't think that there has been a silence. Maybe when it comes to people who are inside that circle of very visible national figures, yes, there's definitely a silence, and it's a deliberate silence, because the saying is that insiders don't criticize each other. When you're an insider, you're not going to criticize another insider. When you're a national leader and you're in that same circle, you're not going to go head to head with someone, because that's bad PR. That can hurt your popularity, and there are many reasons for that. But I lost my train of thought. But I was saying that
different standard. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was saying that other community leaders, I would say, have been critical of these trends, have been speaking out. Specifically, ulama, elder ulama especially, but that group, right, are seen as irrelevant. They don't get it. They're often told that they don't get it. They're often told that they're not relevant. They're often told that, well, you don't understand the situation here, and your mindset is still overseas. And so we have marginalized, deliberately, there's been a marginalization of these scholars and these ulama who have themselves dealt with all of the pressures of modernity, colonialism. They have lived through that. They have fought through that, and they have succeeded in their efforts against that. And they fought those battles, and so they're in the best position to speak out against modernity, to show us the way on that. And they have been doing that, but that doesn't really get through the echo chamber of social media popularity and so forth. How many times have we heard that, if an imam doesn't have English as his first language, he's not relevant, and we can't have him give the khutbah, and so on and so forth. I think that is a very racist kind of mentality to have, or a very ethnocentric. You have to speak English as your first language, so you're going to disregard all of this, basically an entire segment of the scholars, the most elderly scholars, who we should be benefiting from, and we should be having as our leaders very visibly, when they are 10 times, 100 times more knowledgeable than some of the people that have been given that kind of spotlight. Why aren't they in that position? Because we've been told, many of us, in my generation, for example, that these individuals are not relevant. They don't get it. They don't understand the cultural tide in the West. They just have a back home mentality, and that's not good for dawah. That's not good for having youth come to the mosque and all of this nonsense. Okay, so this has been a deliberate effort. So it's no surprise, right, that in the consciousness is like, where are the leaders who are speaking out against this? Why is it, just one or two people? No, it's not just one or two people. This entire generation, you've disregarded them. You've disregarded them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So moving forward, Rand Corporation is a policy think tank that wrote a lengthy proposal on building so-called moderate Muslim networks. So if Rand's goal is to pit traditional Muslims and reformist Muslims against one another, how do we as a community not fall into this trap of focusing on one another?
Right, so Rand Corporation, this is a think tank. They've written a few policy papers trying to influence Washington in how to get the Muslim world to accept the Western influence and therefore serve Western interests. So basically, they are trying to dupe Muslims into accepting the foreign colonial imperial power in its interests and its project throughout the world, and specifically in the Muslim world. And so one part of that strategy is to boost and empower what they call moderate Muslims, moderate Muslim networks. And what defines a moderate Muslim? A moderate Muslim is someone who does not really see implementation of the Sharia as being very important, and is more amenable to Western law. A moderate Muslim is someone who is very pluralistic in the sense that, all religions are acceptable. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Christian, Jew, whatever. A moderate Muslim is going to have a very soft stance on Israel specifically, and think that, we need to work with Israel and consider it to be a legitimate actor and not try to undermine the Zionist project through BDS, boycotting, and so forth. So all of these different characteristics of what makes a moderate Muslim. And in many ways, the moderate Muslim, how the moderate Muslim is defined by Rand, is not even a Muslim. Is someone who technically, as far as the Sharia is concerned, and what our definition and the definition of Muslim, being Muslim, means, their definition is someone who is outside the fold of Islam, essentially. So they want to promote this group of individuals. Why? Because that group, the moderates, are going to be more amenable to Western influence, Western control, and essentially be Western agents. Okay, so this is not something new. This is not something that Rand invented. This is something that has existed since the beginning of the colonial period. And so a figure like Lord Cromer of the British Empire was very explicit in the kind of strategy of promoting a certain kind of de-Muslimized, de-Islamicized Muslim, essentially a moderate Muslim. So this is something that they're deliberately promoting. As Muslims, I believe, we have to fight this. We have to call out this strategy. We have to call out, because this is undermining, and it has undermined our community in many parts of the world, because you have individuals who are essentially munafiqeen. Okay, they're munafiqeen. They are collaborating with Western agents to oppress the ummah and to kill Muslims and to destroy the rights and the interests of the ummah and the Muslim community. And they have been doing this, for the past 200 plus years, and they're continuing to do it with no abatement in their force and their animosity. So these agents and these traitors, we have to speak out against them. We have to call them out. And that's all I'm asking. We just have to put a light, on these individuals, and we have to be very aggressive with that. There's no kind of love lost, right? There's no love lost when there are people who are betraying the ummah and leading to death and destruction for the ummah. No, there's no we're all brothers in this, let's try to work it out. No, these are traitors, right? This is how we should view it, and we have to be very aggressive, because it's literally lives at stake. Lives at stake, iman at stake, the iman of the community at stake. There's no negotiating on this issue.
I mean, without exaggeration, since I was born, I'm not even that old, but since I was born, the most conservative estimate of the amount of Muslims who have died in Western-led wars Okay, the smallest number is 500,000. Okay, a more realistic estimate, we're looking at 10 million people. Okay, that's the Muslim Holocaust. This is the Muslim century of shame. That's
Yeah.
And you mentioned Lord Cromer. There's another Orientalist, who's less known, by the name of Bernard Cara Duveau. So Berkeley Institute for Islamic Studies actually did a translation of a letter that he wrote to Bernard was a French Orientalist of Islam, and he wrote a letter to Edmund Fayzi on the details that the Western colonial powers must take to preserve their imperial hold on Muslim populations. I highly suggest people read through that letter because, again, on the same theme as Cromer on how to de-Muslimize Muslims and prevent Muslims from being reinvigorated by a Mahdi figure or what have you. So yeah, and the other thing I think is that instead of focusing on one another, we can say that Iblis is the focus, internally and externally, inside the Muslim community, outside the Muslim community. And when we focus on Iblis, we open up the possibility that Muslims are to be loved and are to be reformed, right? That we're not otherizing people in the community who may have certain views or may be influenced by some of the leaders that you mentioned, but that we, both strongly and with mercy, advise them and do amr bil ma'ruf wa nahi al munkar, and then at that point it's up to them, it's their agency as to whether they will accept it or reject the nasiha that people like yourself are giving them. But much like, sometimes I think about, I'm sure you've seen that viral video where that man's son was murdered, and then he said, "I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at the devil." I think that sometimes we lose sight on the cosmic elements that are behind a lot of the troubles that really, when it comes to whether it's the Iraq war, whether it comes to what's happening in Palestine, whether it's happening in Kashmir, yeah, you have like Indian nationalists there, American nationalists there, Chinese nationalists there. They may not even be in cahoots with one another, but the one that's really behind all of this is Iblis, who wants to see humanity fail since the beginning.
Well, Iblis has agents, right?
Yeah.
And Iblis's agents, shayateen, can be from human beings or from jinn, right? So humans can be devils, literally. They can be shayateen. So while I do appreciate the value of nasiha and having a good impression of someone, husn al-dhan, for brothers and sisters, we judge by what's apparent. Okay, we don't have any assumptions about what is in a person's heart, but if they are openly doing things that are leading to death of Muslims and to the destruction of Muslim interests, okay, that's apparent. That's something that we can judge. That's something that our first obligation is to the people who are being oppressed by such individuals. Okay, so we have to, it's not to necessarily give nasiha. That's not necessarily the first obligation. The priority is to stop the harm, to stop the death, to stop the destruction. That is the first priority. If we think that, we want to first give nasiha and maybe we can do something, that's important, but it's not the first priority, because if you just focus on that or prioritize that, then you're part of the injustice. You are enabling the injustice, in fact. So we first have to stop the harm, stop that oppression, and then, yes, of course, we want to see if that person can be reformed, and we are going to give nasiha, we're going to advise, we're going to, if necessary, condemn, and if they are not willing to change, and they're not willing to reform, then okay, then it's very clear. That's very clear that this is a person who is an agent. Okay, we can't be so naive, right? That that the enemies of Islam. Do you think Iblis, for example, do we think Iblis is so incompetent that he doesn't know the power of the munafiq? That he doesn't know how to one of the ways to control the ummah or to influence the ummah is to have agents who are outwardly part of the ummah, part of the Muslim community, and might even be leaders of the Muslim community. The colonizers definitely figure that out, and this is what they wrote about. They wrote about, like, we're going to target certain individuals who have all the outward trappings of being traditional scholars and who are connected to these different kinds of institutions, scholarly and religious institutions, the tariqah, the jami'ah, the different institutions, the different madaris, madrasa. So they deliberately were targeting them to bring them on board and to put them on their payroll. And then they became agents of those colonizers. That was their plan. Like, they're not incompetent, stupid people. They understand that those individuals are not going to be criticized as openly, right? The way to one of the most subversive ways for power to maintain control is to mask itself, right? There's the iron fist, and then there's the glove, the velvet glove on the iron fist. And so this is something that the colonizers were very well aware of, something that Iblis is very well aware of. And so we have to be conscious of it and not be naive about it, because that naivete is going to cost lives, has cost lives, is going to cause defeat for the ummah if we're not aware of this. And certainly if we look at the seerah and we look at just look at the Khulafa al-Rashidun. Okay, what was the decision that was made for the tribes who, after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, decided we're no longer going to pay zakat. We're no longer going to pay zakat. What did Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, what did he decide to do in that situation? Right? It wasn't let's just have a nice get together and discuss this like brothers. No, he had a very severe response because he recognized the threat. He recognized the stakes at that moment. The Prophet ﷺ has just passed away, and you already have these tribes that are threatening the unity and the stability of the ummah in this very vulnerable stage. And so he took very severe action in order to stop the harm, to stop the oppression, to stop the injustice. So if we have this kind of broader sense and understanding of the seerah and the example of the Khulafa al-Rashidun and so forth, then we're going to be in a better position to handle the threats that are now plaguing the community in the modern period.
Mm-hmm. Just to correct or properly express what I was trying to say was that I don't think that the Musaylimas need the nasiha. Absolutely not. But there are those who, because they're caught up in the mainstream Muslim pop culture, they may be naively deceived by some of these, again, leaders who are invited, who may not be criticized, who are headliners at Muslim conventions. And so those lay people, those learners, I think, like we said, that we speak to them, accept or reject whatever nasiha we give them, but there are the Musaylimas out there. There are those who are maybe not explicitly claiming false prophet, but hey, when you're exiting the Sharia and inventing a new Sharia, that's pretty much what a prophet is. That's the function of a prophet in Islam. So moving
you have
forward,
Dajjals, you have these different false prophets and false messiahs. So that's a reality. We also know that there are ulama su, like the evil scholars. The Prophet ﷺ has warned us about these individuals. So we can't ignore that. And just to clarify, I'm not talking about the students or individuals who are just trying, they might be influenced incorrectly. We shouldn't have like that kind of harsh approach when it's just personal interaction, one-on-one, obviously. But when it's a public figure and it's someone who is very influential and very wealthy, and who is being, flying around the world, speaking at different conventions and conferences, and saying things that are directly impacting the interests of Muslims, then in that case, I don't think that harsh, clear-cut condemnation is something that's off the table.
Completely agree. Muhammad Rasulullah والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم. Muhammad is the messenger of God, and those who are with him are harsh on the disbelievers and merciful to one another. So moving forward, Muslim feminists say that they are attracted to the movement because Muslim men are not doing enough. So how much of that is a legitimate criticism, and how much of that is just, brainwashing or what have you by mass media or universities? And then also, how do we tackle that accusation?
So we're covering all the controversial questions.
That's what we're known for, me and you.
Yeah. So, alhamdulillah. Yeah, the thing is that Muslim men as oppressors, Muslim men, this idea that Muslim women are turning to feminism and feminist discourse because Muslim men are so trash and so oppressive. I definitely don't buy this. I think that this is an extremely noxious, false narrative. And whoever is propounding this narrative is either ignorant or is malicious. Because this is also a colonial narrative. This is what the colonizers really understood, is that the way that we can destabilize the Muslim community and turn them against one another is to tell them that, oh, look, the Muslim women are being oppressed by the Muslim men. Look at how Muslim women have to cover themselves and how Muslim women are not allowed to have sex with whoever they want, and Muslim women are not allowed to have these kinds of very visible roles like our women do in Europe and in America. And so, yeah, you guys need to rise up and fight against this patriarchal oppression. And so this was a strategy. This was a strategy that unfortunately has worked in many parts of the Muslim world, where Muslim women who felt this kind of or felt the weight of this kind of argument, bought it, and then started to attack Muslim men and criticize Muslim men. Alhamdulillah, wasn't all Muslim women, but certain very vocal Muslim women have been duped by this and continue to be duped by it. In reality, I don't think that Muslim women are being oppressed. I think the very idea that Muslim women as a category, as a class, are being oppressed by Muslim men as a class, I think that is incoherent on its face for many reasons. One of the reasons is, think about how misogynistic this idea is. Actually, ironically, it is a misogynistic belief to say that women are so incompetent, Muslim women are so incompetent and stupid, essentially, that that men are able to just manhandle them and control them and violate them and oppress them for generations and centuries. Like Muslim women have been so incompetent that they haven't been able to fight off or to match wits with these male oppressors, and they needed the colonizer to come and enlighten them about their state. Like, they're too stupid.
Raising their sons to be oppressors and raising
right. They're raising your own
oppressed.
son. Exactly. Like it's just a completely outlandish idea, and the only way that this idea is justified is anecdotal. Unfortunately, it's anecdotal evidence to say that, oh well, I have a friend. And I know women, and I know certain family members who they're in a violent marriage and they're abused, there's domestic violence. Of course, that exists. There are plenty of people who are jerks. Okay, that exists in every culture, that exists in every place. In fact, it exists more so in non-Muslim societies. Okay, Islam is protecting Muslim women, and Muslim men are more honorable in protecting the rights of women than non-Muslim men. Do we really believe that? Do we really believe that Islam is different in providing guidance and providing direction for how we treat each other? If we really believe that, then we should recognize and understand that Muslim men and women are going to be better and they're going to be more sound and more healthy in their relationships than non-Muslims. Okay? Do we not have like that kind of ghayrah for our own ummah? Do we not have this kind of loyalty to our own ummah, to Islam? Don't we have this kind of confidence in our deen? So whenever people say that, oh, the Muslim community is plagued with these kinds of issues and this kind of hand-waving that often is based on just anecdotes or certain mainstream Western narratives that have a very direct agenda to make Islam look stupid and backwards. So when you have that, I just roll my eyes because I think, look how naive. Where is the the loyalty to the ummah? So I don't think that this is the case. I think there are certain Muslim men that are abusive. We can acknowledge that, and we should address those kinds of abuses. The Sharia does address that. Our community has been addressing that. Okay, to say that, oh, we've just realized that this is an issue, basically you're throwing, the entire community under the bus. You're throwing generations of Muslim men under the bus. What are the implications of that? Like, how can you have such a negative view? We're supposed to have husn al-dhan of individuals, right? Your individual brother or sister, you have to have the best thoughts. Okay, but some of us, okay, especially these feminists, have su'a dhan of entire generations, right? They have a bad conception of bad assumption of entire generations of Muslims. How can this be compatible with Iman? How is this compatible with Iman to have su'a dhan of the Ummah itself? So I mean, I can speak for hours on this issue and how ignorant in terms of Islam, and just conceptually, Allah has, do you think Allah has, yes, men have been given strength, certain physical strength, right? And sometimes some men will use that physical strength in wrong ways to oppress. No doubt about it. And some Muslims included. But Allah has given women strengths too. And has given women abilities too. They're not necessarily physical strengths. Women have higher emotional intelligence. Women have better linguistic abilities. Women have, these kinds of strengths in interpersonal interaction, and women can also use those to a negative end and in abusive ways. Okay, women can manipulate men. Women can emotionally abuse men, and when you look at those kinds of statistics, women are far and away more abusive than men are when it comes to emotional and psychological abuse. So even the feminist claim that men are just inherently more prone to oppress and abuse, like, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't even match with the empirical evidence.
You make some good points, and I think definitely so. 100% agree. And on the macro level, when we're looking at it from a theoretical perspective, that you have an Islamic thesis that operates separately from the individualist enlightenment / feminist thesis, and that maybe in some areas there'll be some overlap, but ultimately these are two completely modus operandi, and they cannot really exist in the same heart, to be frank.
That's fine. Like, the thing is that we can acknowledge that they're separate paradigms. You have a feminist paradigm, a modernist paradigm, and then the Islamic paradigm. And it's one point to make. It's an important point to say that these two cannot, they're not congruent and compatible, and they can't exist fully in one heart, as you put it. But I think we have to take the further step. We have to say that not only are they not compatible, Islam is clearly superior. Islam is clearly rationally and morally superior to these other ideologies. These other ideologies are incoherent. They do not match up with the truth. And any person with sense, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, do you not have sense to recognize how Islam is clearly the truth and the Ummah has been on the truth? This is, I think, a very important step that we can't forget.
One thing that I've shared a couple of times so far on my page is that academia is a lot like the analysis of the sewer system, because it's dealing with, again, and this is if it's even accurate description of the sewer system, because the sewer system is beneath us, but it's like there's no acknowledgement on who built the sewer system, on where all this matter is coming from, on where it's going, on the purpose. There's nothing, none of that. And so maybe you got some like, the viscosity is being measured, and the, that sort of thing. But there's no acknowledgement of what's above that system, and there's no acknowledgement of where everything's coming from. So similarly, like, let's say we even study economics, for example, right? We can study supply and demand. We can study, certain moral economic theory from a purely Enlightenment, naturalistic perspective. But you're not acknowledging that there's a divine hierarchy there. You're not acknowledging that there's rizq. You're You're not acknowledging that there's a purpose and that there's a measurement and that there is an ethical means of distributing that rizq. That kind of the إنما العلم ثلاث آية محكمة فريضة عادلة سنة قائمة. They're ignoring that process, which often deals in the vertical. I do want to say that you said something I want to get back to very quickly. You mentioned that the arguments that are made for or by Muslim feminists are largely anecdotal. Now, one potential problem that we have as Muslims in the West is that you mentioned that the Sharia has many solutions to the existing problems that Muslim women may face in the event of a problem domestically. One of the issues is that because we don't have courts, Sharia courts in the West, a lot of the times these issues can't be properly dealt with or rectified on the communal level. So they'll use the power of the state, which obviously operates on a completely different paradigm, and again, a sewer paradigm, if I could use that again, to bring the state's powers into the Muslim domestic household. So, what are your thoughts on, I guess, rectifying the issue from a communal level, especially considering the community in many cases will be underfunded and does not have the legal jurisdiction to deal with complex problems?
Well, the thing is that the legal system in the U.S. is, and in the West generally, is extremely pro-woman, especially when it comes to domestic issues. And so the real concern should be that Muslim women aren't using the full extent of the law to violate the rights of Muslim men. Actually, a Muslim woman or any woman in the West can just pick up the phone and call the police and say that her husband or her boyfriend or whatever hit her or abused her, and he'll be dragged off to prison right there and then. He'll be arrested. That's cause for arrest. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to domestic violence, that's the kind of power that the legal system puts in the hands of Muslim women. And so that actually speaks very much against this idea of the oppressed woman, because all the laws in this country, especially when it comes to domestic abuse, because now they've even, in the Obama era, the definition of abuse was expanded. So even emotional abuse, a man could be detained and imprisoned for the accusation that he has emotionally abused his spouse. So this is, and then damages when you look at divorce, okay, and how much the woman can be awarded by a judge according to the legal system. You have no-fault divorce, where a woman can be engaged in all kinds of unethical behavior, and she can file for divorce and then be entitled to half of a man's wealth and property that is not hers, as far as the Sharia is concerned, as far as ethics are concerned. But the way that they've defined property, the way that they've defined how divorce proceedings take place, when it comes to custody of children, there's so many violations of ethics, and non-Muslims recognize this, and this is a big problem that many are now speaking out on, that we have created a system, this is what they say, we have created a secular system that is systematically violating the rights of men in the favor of women. So when it comes to Muslim women, I think the question is not where can they get recourse. Obviously, there's a secular legal system that is going to go above and beyond to give them as much as possible, and we see this. I've heard so many tragic stories. A man, for example, will lose his kids and not be able to see them, even though his wife is an alcoholic, is a drug user. But the judge ruled in the favor of the mother because in 90% of cases, custody is given to the mother, despite other factors. So many tragic cases like this. It's more of a question of, can Muslim women not be tempted to violate the rights of Muslim men? Can they be encouraged not to use the full extent of the law that's given to them to destroy a Muslim man's life? okay, to literally destroy his life in terms of having him imprisoned, having his wealth taken, having his children taken away. Alimony. Look at the way that alimony after divorce, how much that violates the rights of men, because the man is on the hook for the rest of his life. As long as his ex-wife doesn't get remarried, he has to pay. That's contrary to Islamic law. There's no such thing as alimony in the Sharia. The amount of nafaqah that is given to the wife after divorce is only a certain period of her iddah after the divorce, but it doesn't proceed indefinitely, right? So these are things that are violating the Sharia, but Muslim women have full access to that. They can insist on alimony using the secular law. So I don't know if this is what you meant with your question, or if I answered it.
It's definitely. I do think that there is a way forward for the Muslim community, and inshallah, like after this interview, we're going to do some reflection, and I'll also be writing on some of these topics, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and coming up with possible solutions. Also, everything that you just mentioned, that's an example of what's not anecdotal, because we do have a lot of statistical data that will actually back what everything that you've just said.
You can give an example, like if there are some of these Muslim feminists, give me an example of a case where a Muslim woman her rights have been violated and she had no recourse. Let's talk through an example, if you have one in mind, where like there has to be some kind of extra means that we create within the community to accommodate for that.
I'll have to see if there are examples. Again, a lot of these things are usually kind of smokescreen issues, as you know, where these things will be mentioned as hypotheticals to kind of push the narrative, as opposed to, I don't know how many people actually do go through these extreme circumstances where a qadi is needed to make a judgment, and where there is one missing. These seem to be very particular circumstances that I've heard, again, on an anecdotal basis.
Like for example, if a Muslim woman is being abused, she can just pick up the phone, call 911, right? Your police are going to be on your side. The guy is going to be arrested.
So we often hear, I've heard this, and I've given this advice myself, don't go from 1 to 911, right? If a Muslim woman has found herself in that position, what is her responsibility? So, because we don't want to rely on the state, right? Because the state, again, it's going to come in and complicate matters from a Sharia perspective. Here's the thing. I'll say this.
The scenario is, sorry to interrupt you, but the scenario is that this is a Muslim woman who has no recourse. Like, she is really madluma. She is really being oppressed. Okay, and her community, like, let's imagine, like, the Muslim community surrounding her is just very negligent and maybe even malicious. Like, they all have a vendetta against her. Her whole family hates her and are oppressing her as well. Her husband is oppressing her. She has no recourse within the communal context and the familial context. She still has that phone, right? She can still call the police and have a lot to help her. Like, there's an entire infrastructure, an entire system that is there to help her. And in that case, when she is truly, like, again, the scenario is that she is objectively being oppressed, even objectively in the Shari'i sense, in the sense of the Sharia. There is enforcement. There is a recourse that she has. It's not from the hands of Muslims. It's from the secular state, but she is not without options. That's the point that I'm making. So I don't see this as a very difficult situation for Muslim women. The bigger issue is that being able to go above what is actually just in terms of the Sharia.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, going into prophetic advice on seeking marriage, the Prophet ﷺ did advise Muslim women to look at his deen and look at his akhlaq, right? Because someone could be religious, mutadayyin, but then, maybe they're a little bit harsh. Maybe the power dynamic is something that wouldn't, match that particular woman, culturally or what have you. So that's something that should be looked at prior to marriage, before choosing somebody that could have an improper power dynamic with you, or one that you don't prefer, what have you. Now, I wanted to get into the next question, with your permission. My friend at the Muslim Theist once said that feminism is a snake that its fangs is biting us and its poison is affecting us, and we're focused on the head of that snake, but how do we handle the modern philosophical basis of that ideology? So you have postmodernism. It's a denial of absolute truth in Aristotelian essence. Postmodernists believe, for example, that there's no essence to manhood or womanhood because these are arbitrary categories. And the Anglo-conservatives ground their counter-arguments to that in biology, that men are biologically this way and women are biologically that way. So how do you, or how do we, ground our counter-arguments from the perspective of the divine paradigm?
Yeah, so I think that the social constructionist discourse, what you're calling postmodernist, some call it cultural Marxism, what have you, this is not an ideology that Muslims should be following and falling into. Unfortunately, some have, because they've adopted a kind of decolonial discourse, or they've adopted a critical race theory discourse, and so they've kind of adopted this attitude that might makes right, and that power defines language and defines meaning, and so we have to always be critical of power. And all of these kinds of ideas that, when you follow their implications, contradict Islam, right? Because we're not critical of all power. The ultimate power, the only power, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, the only power is Allah's power. So how can you be saying that power is always unjust, or power is something that should always be critiqued? And this is what the postmodernist discourse drives us to. And so we should reject that because of these kinds of deep contradictions with Islam. We know that there is the reality, the divine reality, the world as it is, as it has been created, and we have been informed of it through revelation, through the Quran, through the Sunnah, and through different kinds of epistemologies that Allah has endowed us with, such as the senses, ihsas, or hiss. Being able to sense, right? That's part of our epistemology as well. So, we have to ground ourselves in the Quran and Sunnah. And how do we do that? Well, we look to our tradition. We look at what the ulama have transmitted to us, and that's how we anchor ourselves, is to the scholarly tradition and the righteous ulama, and they are the inheritors of the prophets. And that is the only way that we can know what the Quran and Sunnah actually is. Revelation hasn't come to us on a flash drive where we can just plug it in and know what the Quran and Sunnah is. No, this is something that we can only know through the chain of transmission, through the scholars who are inheritors of the Prophet. So this is something that will ground us, and this is what will connect us to divine truth, to reality, to objective reality. And if we cut ourselves off with this kind of modernist or postmodernist mindset, then we're truly lost. We're truly without mooring, and we see that, unfortunately, with some of the Muslim discourse in our times, unfortunately.
So one note here is that no, everything you said is correct, of course. But the one thing I'm looking at is obviously no one would dispute that Islam is a gender dimorphic religion. Actually, I don't even like the word gender. I think that's a word that should be applied to objects and not to people. I think that there are sexes, right, male and female.
Oh, okay.
But it's a sexually dimorphic religion. So my question then becomes: is there something essential to male and female in Islam, or is the only thing that we know about male and female what manifests in fiqh? So we know that in fiqh there's different rights, there's different obligations. Is that all we know about male and female in Islam, or is there something more essential to manhood and womanhood?
No, of course. I mean, there is essential manhood and womanhood by the very fact that we are created, and Allah has created Adam alayhi salam, who is our father, right? And He has created our mother, His spouse, in Jannah. And so the very fact that He has created that we are descendants of them means that we have an essential nature. And Allah has, elaborated, the characteristics of manhood, rujula, and the characteristics of womanhood as well. So yeah, of course, there is an objective reality. It's not just something that's purely constructed, and we can just define things however we want. No, and there's no conception of that. Fiqh, different rulings in fiqh are based on the Sharia and the differences that Allah has legislated between how women operate in the world and how men operate in the world. And so there is equality in one sense, in the kind of moral and spiritual sense between men and women, because all things being equal, a man who does a good deed and a woman who does the same good deed, all else being equal, Allah will reward them equally. It's not like the man will get more reward from Allah just because by virtue of being a man. We don't find that anywhere in the religion. But when it comes to different roles, different responsibilities, different positions of authority, then Allah has legislated and commanded very different things out of His wisdom based on the essential characteristics of men versus women. I'm not trying to be Aristotelian by saying essential, because I think that there might be some issues with that kind of projection onto the Quran and Sunnah. But I do think that there's createdness that we have. There are khilqi attributes that men and women have, and we have to aspire to those and towards the mastery of those characteristics within our own sex.
I mean, much like childhood is an essential category that also results in certain characteristics and certain fiqh obligations and responsibilities towards, or huquq, towards children. I mean, that is, I think now you have people identifying as children. That's a different issue. But I think this is an interesting conversation, and I do think that there is an element of this that is an emerging field of research. I would love to see more books on this topic of maru'a, or sacred manhood in Islam. And obviously, maru'a in Jahiliyyah was different than maru'a in Islam, and the Prophet ﷺ did define things maybe a little bit differently. And there are narrations about how the man treats his family, and etc. I'm actually writing, I'm translating a book on Tibb al-Nabi, which is the medicinal advice of the Prophet. And so one of the interesting narrations that came up, and I don't know about the strength of this narration, but one of the ones that's in this particular book, which is by a Hanafi Ash'ari scholar, says that the mu'min eats what his family wants to eat, and the munafiq makes his family eat what he wants to eat. Right? So there are these little things that I think, in a sense, I would love to see more conversation on this. But because of time, inshallah, we'll move on. And this is an important question. What trends are rising and falling currently in the Muslim world, in your view?
In the Muslim world, I think the trend that's really rising is feminism. I really think this wrong idea of what's called women's empowerment or gender justice or whatever nonsense words they want to use for it. I think this is a cancer that's really spreading to the Muslim world. And you have more Muslim women who view haya as something oppressive that was created by men to keep them down. Unfortunately, we're seeing this on, the television stations in the Middle East, right? You have people who are mocking Islamic gender norms and gender roles and gender standards. You have people on these kinds of television programs literally stripping, like taking off the hijab, wearing tons of makeup, and in defiance. You have these kinds of movements in countries like Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Turkey, in Pakistan, in Malaysia, where now they're having, women's marches, right? This kind of ridiculous idea of a women's march.
Aura march.
Yeah, Aura march. And many of these marches actually are coordinated by the West and Western agencies through NGOs. And they're very explicit about this, that they're actually agitating the local population and hiring locals to carry certain signs that they print with certain slogans against Islam, against Islamic sexual morality, promoting homosexuality, promoting transgenderism even. These are things that are not indigenous. Like, this is not what the local population cares about, like whether, this kind of issue. It's not even within their, like, let's put even Islam aside, and even within that local culture, like, they're not having a discussion about LGBT rights. Like, it's completely beyond their understanding, because that's not something that's culturally relevant, let alone contrary to Islam. But these things are being forced and injected, and they're being paid, and people are being paid off by NGOs to go and march and to make this show so that photographers can take pictures and say, oh, look, the Muslim world is rising against the oppressive force of Islam, and they're finally waking up to the oppression of and the injustice of the patriarchy. And so this is all optics, and this is all just something that is fabricated to give the rest of the Muslim world the impression that, oh, wow, so this is really happening. Because once you see it, you believe it, and you start thinking that, oh, okay, this is something that's being normalized. And so we have to be more open to it because it's happening. So this is cultural manipulation, cultural engineering, psychological manipulation that's happening. And the main thing that they're focusing on is women. And Trump's State Department was explicit about this. And there was a report last year, it was reported in the Washington Post even, where one of these State Department officials for Trump said that we have to focus on Muslim women. If we want to really change the Muslim world and modernize it, which is code for make it more amenable to Western interests and make it more willing to follow our rules and help us achieve our interests, the way to do that is to target Muslim women. That's our strategy, because they're going to be the ones who are going to accept it more readily. And there are biological reasons for that. Like, women tend to be more conciliatory in terms of their nature. This is a biological fact that cognitive biologists have noted when looking and comparing between male and female humans and even other species. Women are more likely to cooperate and collaborate with outgroups, right? Others who are outside of their culture, outside of their religion, outside their ethnicity. That's just something inherent to women, whereas men are more likely to protect their in-group and be aggressive towards outgroups. And men are more willing to sacrifice themselves for their own group at the expense of their own lives even, and protect women and protect children and so on and so forth. Whereas women have more instinct to say, oh, well, why don't we just collaborate? Why don't we just hold hands across political or religious or ethnic divide? And sometimes that can be extremely dangerous and extremely deadly because you are sacrificing the interests of your own group for cooperation with individuals from the out group. And so colonizers have recognized this kind of weakness that women have. Women have a certain weakness, men have weaknesses in other areas, but this is a weakness that can be taken advantage of and exploited. Exactly. So they're explicit about this. They're very explicit. Like, we're going to target Muslim women and use them to affect these modernization programs, promote moderate Muslim networks, as the Rand report said, and so forth.
Yeah, and that characteristic of women is not. We'll get more into this, inshallah.
It's a strength when it comes to women that having this kind of conciliatory attitude, empathy. Like, that's really valuable in the family context. Women are often the glue that holds the family together. They are the glue that holds the family together, and it's because of these kinds of characteristics. But when it comes to political, like real politic and real, diplomacy and being in that kind of role where lives are at stake and it's war, it's literally war, then is that kind of sentimentality and that kind of cognitive profile the best for those kinds of situations? No, clearly not.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I wanted to say that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We could leave that there. There are other questions that we'll go
Well, feel
into.
free to disagree. Feel
No, no,
free
no.
to.
I absolutely agree with what you said. There was a point that I was going to make, but I've completely lost it. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Inshallah, if it comes back to me, I'll mention it.
Sure.
So, next up, what is going on with ulama who aren't even addressing iman-threatening issues with softer language, let alone with explicit emphasis? And what are the ulama that you are in contact with saying about this phenomenon? Why are the only ulama that are being overtly vocal on this issue are those that are strong against you and in support of some of the libertine activists and reformers?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think the ulama are silent on this. I think the ulama, we have to trust them, and we should view them as leaders because they are our leaders. And when it comes to their statements on these kinds of things, they haven't been silent. They're the generation that were fighting the colonizers in the subcontinent, in northern Africa. They're fighting secularization in countries like Turkey and so forth. So this is something that they have more experience than any of us, and we should see them as leaders. But the question is, who do we take as our leaders? Who do we view as ulama? If unfortunately have this kind of dependence, you have this dependence on social media, and your understanding of what Islam is and who Muslim leaders are and who the ulama are is just dictated completely by social media, then you're going to have a very skewed understanding of who the ulama are and what they're saying, what they're not saying, what they're supporting, and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. And that's why I find this idea of, why are the ulama not addressing these issues? I find that preposterous. I think that the ulama that I know are addressing these issues. The ulama that I know are talking very vocally and are very aggressive on these ideologies. And, this kind of idea that, we have to be very soft and have adab with the kinds of, kufr that is constantly attacking Islam. We have to be very soft and gentle when the, enemies of Islam are literally destroying lives and, taking people out of Islam. Like, no, this is not the attitude of the ulama. This is not how they have operated for centuries. And the latest generation that's coming from these countries and from these regions that have been racked with colonialism, this is not their attitude at all. They're very open-eyed. They're not myopic in being blind to these kinds of threats, and they are speaking about it. So the ulama that I'm in contact with have this kind of attitude, and they approve of being very hard and very harsh on these ideologies. They're not neutral. They're attacking Islam. They're constantly attacking and destroying and violating the rights of Islam, oppressing Muslims. Like, brothers and sisters, we have to wake up. Like, this is not a joke. This is not a joke. We're niggling over like the finer points of tone when we're dealing with these existential threats. Okay? These are not other Muslims. Okay? These, sometimes they're agents. Sometimes they're outright kuffar. They're outright enemies of Islam who want to destroy Islam. They want to destroy Islam and the Muslim world in its entirety.
Well, so you're right in that. Look, my own sheikh, some of the shuyukh that I talk to, I actually talk to a very wide variety of shuyukh in my city. I'm very active, alhamdulillah. And there are plenty of people who are saying what you're saying. There was a cartoon recently on Muslim Safe Space, which, again, very lovely page. Go and like it, everyone that's listening. Muslim Safe Space, they had this cartoon, for those of you who haven't seen it, where there's like a lady on stage, of course with a turban hijab, right? Why not?
I shouldn't call it a hijab, it's just a turban.
Yes,
a female turban.
You know what? You're absolutely right, and I do have an article on the word hijab, so you're absolutely right. So she's saying things that are very provocative and against the tradition, against, again, established tradition, against consensus. But you have these two shuyukh who are saying, how's the weather? kind of conversation, and oh, let's talk about this in the khutbah, let's talk about that in the khutbah. And then there's a character that looks very suspiciously like you, who basically just condemns what is happening on stage, and rightfully so. And then those shuyukh turn their attention to you. What I'm referring to in my question is that you have a lot of, and I made this promise to myself when I started my page, I'm not going to mention like any names or any, I look, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, because definitely when something is public, like we said at the beginning, there's a degree of being held accountable. This is just some unique feature of my page that I don't get into names personally. However, tons of like celebrity speakers and celebrity scholars and people that run, again, very big and more mainstream organizations, and people running the conventions, including some that I've called out by name, breaking my own rule. They are kind of just bystanders. And when they're questioned about this, they act like innocent bystanders. Where it's like, oh, no, I didn't know. We just have a plurality of views at this convention. And, that's, I don't agree with that aspect of so-and-so, but, the overall, bing, bing, blah, blah, the whole spiel. So I guess the question is, like, why aren't those individuals, and I don't know if they're the majority or if they're just the biggest individuals, why aren't they talking about this? Is it because they're in the in-group and that they've been compromised? Is it because they have priorities and they don't see this as one of their priorities?
Well, I think that there are different reasons. One is that they are insiders, and so they have an echo chamber where they're not really attuned to what is happening and the kind of effects that their decisions have on the Muslim community. Some of them are just very naive, and they don't recognize really the threat that the Muslim community is facing from some of these modernist ideologies. And so their naivete is directly threatening the community. And some of them, they have other motives. Like they can't speak against certain ideologies because it will threaten their position at a university. And they don't want to lose that position at the university by coming out and speaking against LGBT, or coming out and saying something, that's pro or as like anti-pluralism or anti-perennialism. Some of them have government positions, or they're on different kinds of boards that will be threatened. That position will be threatened by speaking out on these issues. Some of them have media access. They have a direct line with certain reporters and certain editors at mainstream news outlets like CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. Some of them have political connections and a political career that they don't want threatened. And these are things that, again, you said the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You can justify anything on the basis of good intentions, and can say that, well, look, if I'm a Muslim in this visible position at the university, or I'm a Muslim who is able to write an op-ed for the New York Times that's going to be read by thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, and I'm a Muslim, then I can positively be doing da'wah, I can positively influence many people towards Islam, and so that justifies me being silent on these issues. And so this is something that you can do to self-justify. But this is really very myopic. It's very naive. It's not really an objective way to think about things. If you are in these kinds of positions and you are seen as a leader, and for example, you're promoting and praising a certain politician who is very openly making blasphemous remarks, very openly saying things that violate Islamic values, like promoting LGBT, calling the Sharia barbaric, these kinds of politicians, if you're promoting that person because she said something against Islamophobia, but then those other things that violate Islam you're silent on, the message that you as a leader are giving to the people who are looking up to you, the Muslims that are looking up to you, you're giving the message that all of these kinds of anti-Islamic views and values and even blasphemy, that's okay. You know, it's fine. It's legitimate to have someone be your leader and your role model, be a blasphemer, and basically make fun of God, make fun of Allah, or even say something like, my Allah is a my Allah is a she. Things like this.
You know what's funny is that when you said that, my computer kind of like froze a little bit, and I was like, "Whoa!" I mean, that's some blasphemy right there. But no, you're quoting.
Yeah,
I can't.
Yeah, I'm quoting. Like this is what they're saying, and these are politicians that are being paraded around in the mainstream community. They're being invited to masajid. Oh, mashallah, what an amazing, inspirational leader and role model. You're so brave. Oh my God. Let's take some pictures together, have a nice photo op, and mashallah, let's have a fundraiser. Let's raise $50,000, for whatever. And this person is saying, my Allah is a she.
That's a good point. Like, I think there should be an article called, like, the Muslim Ariana Grande or whatever. But she has a song by that same title, by the way. I don't know that.
Okay.
I just see, when you go on Facebook, you see this stuff. But it's like God is a Woman. That's the name of, I think, one of the latest singles. So it's just like they're taking that and they're using Islamic language and saying, oh, why not?
Yeah. Oh, so the people who know better. Okay, some people they're genuinely ignorant, and there is that separate issue of why are we taking ignorant people who are making kufr statements right and left? Why are they our leaders? That's one problem. The second problem is, why do we have people who know better not saying something when they are in a position to say something? And this idea, you said you have this one rule of not calling people out. I don't agree with that. I've been writing publicly for over 8 years now, writing and speaking publicly for over 8 years. And for the vast majority of that time, I haven't called people out. It's only within about a year and a year and a half that I've started naming people. And there's a good reason for that. It's because I realized that the private conversation wasn't really having an effect. And you had Muslims who would agree with me, and they'd say, yeah, Daniel, you're right. LGBT, we shouldn't be supporting this as a Muslim community. Yeah, perennialism, this is a bad idea. We shouldn't be supporting this. Oh, but look, I love so-and-so figure. I love so-and-so activist. I'm like, wait, why do you love so-and-so? Why are you supporting so-and-so? That person is promoting that LGBT agenda. That person is promoting the perennialism. Don't you recognize that? Mm-hmm. And what I realize is that the thing is that when you have a certain kind of adoration or admiration for someone, you kind of overlook things that are obviously bad, and there's blind. And unless someone says something, hey, by name, look at what this person is saying. Look at what this person is doing. Look at it. Here it is. Here's the screenshot. People won't really get it. They won't recognize it. So this was the frustration I was having year after year after year. I was trying to avoid mentioning names completely. But then, look, at the end of the day, the stakes are way too high. I realized that the hadith that I always go back to, Sahih hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, is that the example of the people who maintain the hudud of Allah and maintain kind of Islamic values, and those who don't maintain those values and don't abide by those boundaries, is like people who on a safina, on a ship, and you have the people who maintain the Islamic values at the top of the ship, on the top deck, and then the ones who don't below deck. And at some point, the people below deck say that they have to go to the top deck for water. And so when they want water, they go and ask the people at the top of the deck for water. But after a while, they say, look, why are we wasting our time going to the top, asking these people on top for water? We can just dig a hole. We can dig a hole at the bottom of the ship and get access to water directly, so we don't have to have to bother with going to those people. So then the responsibility of the people at the top of the deck is to stop the people below deck, because everyone's lives are at stake. It's an existential threat. And so what are you going to do to stop the people cutting and digging the hole, right? This is a time-sensitive issue. Okay? It's not a ship's hull is only so thick, right? It's only so thick. You have a limited amount of time before that ship is the hull is going to be breached and water is going to shoot in and everyone is going to drown. So at a certain point, every method is on the table, right? In that existential situation, if you can accomplish the goal of preventing them from digging it through soft, gentle means, great. But if that doesn't work, you have to escalate, and you have to use whatever means are necessary, because the greater good is going to be threatened by their actions. And so calling people out, that's one of the means that I have had to resort to. I don't want to resort to that. I want to avoid that, but there's no choice.
I think you made a persuasive argument, and inshallah, I think you've changed my mind.
I encourage you, and there's certain rules and there's certain adab, because if you notice, like the things that I've written over the past year and a half, calling people out, it's all based on their public statements, right? Public statements that they have on their social media that has been reported on them, and they haven't, redacted or they haven't disputed. And I just, okay, here it is. So explain it.
This is not back talk. These are not rumors.
Not back talk. I'm not spying on anyone. I'm not like going and trying to find dirt on people behind their back, or in the sense of like going through their private lives. No, absolutely not. It's just public information, because I'm fine actually if there's someone who is secretly doing all kinds of wrong things, but their public persona is good. Okay, then how am I going to know about the bad things that they're doing in private? And it's not going to have a bad effect on the community because they're maintaining a good public persona. The iman of the community is not going to be affected negatively because of that good public persona. Their private misdeeds, everyone has private sins, right? Everyone has private sins. But we don't dig into those things, and that's not going to necessarily affect the community negatively unless they start advertising their sins and they start boasting about their sins and start so on and so forth. So that's why you don't need to do anything that violates Islamic ethics. And this is exactly in accordance with Islamic ethics to see, okay, you said this, okay, explain yourself. You aligned with this, you endorsed this, explain it. Tell us how this is acceptable. In that situation, they can address it. They can say, "Oh, this was a mistake," or "Oh, I didn't know," or whatever else.
You have the example in the Quran of Ashab al-Sabt. You have those who violated the Sabbath. You have those who
Bani Israel.
Right, exactly. From the children of Israel, those who violated the Sabbath. You had the second group who said they're violating the Sabbath, but let's mind our own business. Who cares? Let them do it. They have the right to do it. And we have the right to do what we want. And you had a third group.
Not that they have the right to do it. The second group recognized that they're doing something wrong, but okay, that's not our business. Like, they are doing sins, right, and we have our own way. We don't need to, intervene in that.
Yeah, and then the third group, of course, condemned, what the first group was doing, and the first two groups were not saved. It was only the third group that was saved. And it was because of their amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy al munkar. The point that I had lost earlier came back to me, and I do encourage that people make salawat on the Prophet, because a lot of the times that this I can't tell you how many times that's happened, where you forget something, because there's a lot of things that swim around in this neighborhood over here, and then you lose them. So then you say salawat, and then the fish come back. So the auto marches that we were talking about before, it's kind of interesting how they picked the issue of aura. They didn't pick the issue of honor killings. They didn't pick the issue of racism with regards to marriage. They didn't pick the issue. There are legitimate grievances that may exist that feminists could target, but they specifically pick issues that fly in the face of Islamic tradition and create this tension and create this edge posting, as some people may say. This is obviously deliberate to me, because there's no, like I said, there are many grievances in places like Pakistan, and not just grievances with women, grievances that are economic in nature, grievances that are cultural in nature, but the intention is on the hijab.
Right, this is how you get people to adopt Western values. Because you have them marching for something that is a Western issue. It's completely foreign to Islam. They're not marching because of riba, right? And the proliferation of riba. They're not marching for the proliferation of zina and the increase in zina. This is something that has a major impact on society. And even non-Muslim, secular-minded people recognize the extreme harms and damage that comes from sex outside of a and so this is
intergenerational effect of that.
What do you mean?
Intergenerational effect of zina. If someone is ibn zina, okay,
right,
that's something that you're just gonna have to live with. You know, your mother and father may not be married, and they may not get along, and perhaps
you won't not necessarily know your father.
You may not know your father or your mother, or you may. They may be married to somebody else, okay? That could cause problems between families, especially in a smaller community, but even in a big community. You have people who are not talking, and you, in a smaller community, there's obviously the danger of, if you're ibn zina, and you marry somebody, you could end up marrying someone from your own family. And this is something that has happened. I've heard stories of people who live in these small towns, and they're boyfriend and girlfriend, and then once they get married, so-and-so's relatives come, and then so-and-so's relatives come, and they realize, oh wait, we're related. It turns out that we're family after all. Now, of course, there'll be cousins or second cousins. My point is that when there's zina, there's an ambiguity on who parents are.
There's examples of outright incest. I wrote about this on my website, MuslimSkeptic.com, where you had boyfriend and girlfriend for 1 year. They've been sleeping together, non-married, and then they did a ancestry test and found out that, oh, I'm actually your half-sister. Oh, I'm your half-brother. So they were committing sibling incest for a year. And when they found out, they were so depressed and so shocked. They were contemplating suicide. They're contemplating killing themselves because of what they have been doing. So this is and that's just one small example of the kinds of harms of zina.
So moving forward, again, I mean, the conversation gets better and better, but because I don't want to take too much more time, inshallah, I could skip over a couple of questions. One point.
Sorry, I'm speaking too much, maybe.
No, absolutely not. Everything that you're saying is of benefit, and inshallah, people, soak it in as much as they can. So one point that I'll make, this was a question, but I'll just say it so that for the benefit of the audience, that many established conferences are compromised by activists and icons, and so they'll make a strong effort to join boards, whether it's mosque boards, organization boards, fundraiser boards, and they'll draft like vague rules of conduct and then harass and sabotage people who don't conform to the party line. And I mean, a good example of this in Canada is the Bill C-16, where you have very vague legislation on misgendering people, and it's now considered a criminal offense. But it's extremely vague, and nobody really knows exactly when it's to be applied. But the point is that this law could be used to harass people who potentially misgender somebody. I wanted to ask you, what is it that gives you your steadfast trust in the tradition?
That's a part of being a believer, being a Muslim. Like, you have to trust the tradition. I mean, that's a requirement, as I mentioned, because how are you going to know what the Quran and the Sunnah actually are and what Allah has said, what revelation is, without the Islamic tradition? Because that is the conduit to knowing what revelation is. But then when you actually look and see the genius of our ulama and the level of brilliance that they had, when you look at someone like Imam Ahmad, Imam al-Shafi, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Ghazali, Imam Nawawi, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, all of these scholars, their level of genius, their level of insight and intellect, and the way that they are understanding Islam and writing about it and teaching on it, and their level of taqwa, their level of their khuluq and what has been transmitted about them as individuals. This is our tradition, right? It's a lived tradition, and these kinds of miracles, these things that you read about and you look, our scholars, our ulama, they truly are the inheritors of the Prophet. So these are the kinds of things that give you trust in the tradition. Other ways that you have confidence, I have confidence in Islam and in the Islamic tradition, is I see what the tradition offers in contradistinction to the modern world. What I see is the modern world is full of batil, is full of falsehood, just oozing out of every pore. It's extremely obvious when you put it into high relief against the Islamic tradition, the haqq and the truth that we find in Islam, and the guidance, the hidayah that comes from, that's transmitted through that conduit of tradition. It's plain. It's like night and day. And so when you see night and day, then it's very obvious what is the truth and what is falsehood. So all of those things give me confidence and trust and love and appreciation for being a part of this ummah, and I thank Allah every day. I try to be as thankful as possible and pray that Allah keeps all of us on Sirat al-Mustaqim, prevents us from falling into these kinds of deviations and falsehoods that are just being pressed on us from every direction in the modern world. Are only, if we go back to this idea of the safina, Islam is the safina, the tradition is the safina, is the ship that is going to save us from drowning. And so that's the way that I conceive of it.
Thank you. And this is going to be the last question, inshallah. Are there any Western intellectuals or public figures that you think are worth dialoguing with about common problems?
I don't think that dialoguing maybe is the word that I'd use. I think that if we're using it just generally, okay, conversation, but what is the intention behind it? Our intention should always be, our niyyah should be dawah and calling people to Islam. I don't think that there's any... I think that there's different Western thinkers, public intellectuals that have interesting ideas. They have interesting critiques of modernism, and wherever there's something good there, of course, we should try to learn from it, adapt it for our own purposes. Because as far as the West is concerned, if the Western tradition is eating itself and you have infighting, that's great. Okay, we can benefit from that and kind of goad it on. Why not? But as far as dialogue in the sense that, okay, we're equal partners, then I don't have that kind of sense when it comes to non-Muslims, because I don't have that level of respect. Like, this is a person who is speaking the truth and I'm going to benefit from that truth. No, they don't have Islam, so how can they know the truth? That's a fundamental divide, and so that doesn't mean I can't interact and speak respectfully. But when you have this concept of dialoguing, let's look at that word more closely. It's more of a interchange between equals. And if there is a Muslim scholar, for example, speaking with, like, look at Ahmed Didat as a very simple example. Is he dialoguing? Yeah, may Allah have mercy on him. Is he dialoguing with his interlocutors, with these Christians? No, he's a beacon of truth, speaking the haqq in the face of falsehood. And is he respectful? Yes. Is he eloquent? Yes. Is he a gracious, guest or host, depending on whatever the case may be? Yes, he's all of those things. But is that a dialogue in the true sense? No, of course not. So I think it's important to have this kind of mindset.
There's a very good book that I'm reading by Zafar Bangash, who is the author or the creator of Crescent International, the newspaper. It's on power relations. I don't remember the title of the book, but it's on the treaties of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so it looks a lot at the power dynamic of that time in the 7th century, and in particular the contracts and the treaties and the letters that the Prophet had sent to non-Muslims, to tribes, to the Byzantine emperor, to the Sassanid emperor. And you'll find that like the tone is always very different with non-Muslims than it is with Muslim. Obviously there were expectations when you interacted with a king. You see this like even in the film with The Message, where the company of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib go to Ethiopia, and the people bow. I'd have to look at the source for that, but the people bow, and then they ask the company, the Muslims, why aren't you bowing? Don't you bow to your prophet? And then they say, we bow only to Allah. That there's a spine that the Muslims are to have. When you look at the prophetic letters to Heraclius, the king of Abyssinia, it's not that the Prophet ﷺ was being rude, but he was being very succinct and very comprehensive, and not bowing to his authority, and rather just saying, As-salamu ala man ittaba'a al-huda, like, peace to those who are following the true guidance. And he's inviting them to Islam in a way that is neither kowtowing to them nor a blatant disrespectful gesture. But again, you had treaties that the Prophet ﷺ upheld with mushrikeen on certain common issues. Do you think that obviously we're not representing a state in the way that the Prophet was as a statesman, but are there people worth reaching out to, or even communities worth reaching out to here in America and Canada that we can address common issues with? And those common issues don't have to be theological in nature. They could just be on a communal level, on a municipal level.
Yeah, I think that people misuse, some Muslims today are misusing this idea of the treaties that the Prophet ﷺ made. Treaty of Hudaybiyah is one, often misused, misapplied. Hilf al-Fudul is another one, where the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning, how he would support certain non-Muslims in their upholding of justice and their agreement to uphold justice. So I think these are often misused and they're misapplied, because it really depends on the cause and the group and what you have to give up and sacrifice in order to be a part of these kinds of treaties and agreements. Okay, and oftentimes I think it's, again, very naive and very myopic, the kind of agreements that certain Muslim political actors are making. Like, okay, we're going to ally with LGBT and these kinds of activists, and they're going to support Muslim rights, quote unquote, whatever that means. It's always very vague what Muslims are going to get from this kind of alliance versus what Muslims are going to give in this kind of engagement. Okay, we're going to support these specific policy initiatives. We're going to support LGBT, same-sex marriage, transgender bathroom bills, so on and so forth. We're going to support that, and it's very explicit, it's very tangible. But then, what are they offering us? Okay, even if that were a fair trade, what are they offering? It's very ambiguous. Muslim rights generally, and that those rights, by the way, never extend to Muslims who are upholding the Sharia, Muslims who are standing by Deen and will have views that are contrary to liberal LGBT feminist norms. Those Muslims are excluded. Muslims like us are excluded from that kind of protection. These kinds of activist liberal Muslims, unfortunately, will throw people like me, and they have thrown people like me under the bus because we're not abiding by these kinds of liberal values that they're promulgating. So when these activists who are making these kinds of deals and alliances with other groups, with liberal political groups, those Muslims are not going to be on the lookout for our interests. They're not going to be helping us, in the sense that we have values that are completely contradictory to liberal, secular, feminist, LGBT norms, etc. So, I mean, that's one issue, is that this is not an even, like, if we are going to be making alliances, then it has to be smart. It has to be based on, okay, what are you actually giving up? When you do align with an LGBT group, or you go on a women's march, or you align with Christians, right? This is a problem too, because you have another group of Muslims who say that, well, look at these Christian conservatives, and they're fighting against same-sex marriage. Okay, that's good. They're fighting against abortion, which is good. They have these same kind of family values. Okay, great. Then we should align with them. But it turns out that those Christian conservatives, some of these groups, are also actively Zionist, and they're actively working against our brothers and sisters in Palestine. So am I going to have an alliance with them at the expense of my brothers and sisters? Absolutely not. Or some of these Christian groups also are trying to do dawah, their Christian dawah, missionary work, in the Muslim world, and they want to be given free access in order to do that. And so by aligning with them and collaborating with them, that's the quid pro quo. Right. So, okay, what kind of agreement is this? What kind of alliance is this? Is it one that's really based on a understanding of costs and benefits? Or is it just very myopic, very simple-minded, very naive? You're just throwing the Muslim community under the bus. You're violating the interests of the Muslims, the rights of Muslims, because of this kind of political convenience and expediency. No, this is, in many cases, unfortunately, the people who are pushing for alliances are in this kind of mindset and falling into these traps. And they're in no position, unfortunately, to be making these kinds of big decisions on behalf of the Muslim community. Is it theoretically possible? Of course. Of course it's theoretically possible to have a kind of alliance politically and engagement with non-Muslims. But is it serving the interests of the ummah? Is it serving the interests and not violating the rights of the ummah and the benefit or the iman of the ummah? Okay. Bring me that example and we'll talk about it. And that, of course, is theoretically possible. But many of these cases that we see, many of these examples that we see are nowhere near that kind of example. And so when they invoke Treaty of Hudaybiyah and Hilf al-Fudul and all of these kinds of examples, I think is disingenuous. Either they're ignorant or they're malicious. Mm-hmm. Okay? They're not really, when it comes to qiyas, when it comes to applying something from the seerah, to a present condition, is it the correct qiyas? Is it the correct analogy that's being made? Or is just simplistic hand-waving, with just superficial similarities between the situations? Oh, well, the Prophet ﷺ may had a treaty and made an alliance, so why can't we? Like, this is so ignorant. This is very simplistic and simple-minded. And it's not acceptable qiyas in many of these cases.
Well, Brother Haqiqatjou, you've given us a lot to think about, alhamdulillah, so I leave it at that. I just wanted to thank you for giving the time out of your busy schedule. I wanted to also give a quick note that Daniel Haqiqatjou is offering courses at Al-Esna Institute. So on contemporary issues, on atheism, on feminism, on other contemporary issues, philosophical and otherwise. So do check out Al-Esna Institute if you're interested to hear more from Brother.
Alesna.org.
Sorry, say that again, brother?
Alesna.org, ALASNA.org.
Excellent. Okay, so we will, inshallah, I really hope we have another chance to talk at some point and to do a post-mortem of this conversation as well. And,
yeah, would love to.
And similarly, again, thanks again for coming on. This is the first interview of this kind that I do, and inshallah I could have more capable young thinkers like yourself on in the near future. So again, thanks to the viewers for joining us, and we look forward to seeing some comments and constructive criticism as well. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.